You second-guess every decision at work, constantly worrying about whether your strategies will succeed or fail. Every project feels like a gamble where you're holding your breath, waiting to see if your efforts will pay off while you watch. Confident colleagues move forward with unwavering certainty about their outcomes. I am Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist who discovered that victory is determined before the battle even begins. Through the power of acting from a position of inevitable success, what I learned about embodying victory will transform how you approach every challenge and opportunity, giving you the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing the outcome is already decided in your favor. The battlefield may have changed from ancient China to modern offices, but the principle of claiming victory through absolute certainty remains as powerful today as it was 2,500 years ago. But first, like this video, subscribe for more ancient wisdom applied to modern challenges, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to claim victory before the battle begins. Let me share with you the moment everything changed for me as a military leader. I was facing my first major campaign against a force that outnumbered my army 3-1. My advisors spoke in hushed tones about strategies and contingencies, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They were planning for the possibility of victory, was operating from the certainty of it. That morning, I stood before my bronze victory mirror, a polished bronze surface I used for daily visualization. As I looked at my reflection, I didn't see a general hoping to win. I saw a victorious commander who had already achieved triumph. The battle hadn't been fought yet, but in my mind, it was already won. This wasn't positive thinking or empty motivation. It was a fundamental shift in how I perceived reality itself. When I walked into the command tent that day, something had changed. My posture was different. My voice carried a quality that made seasoned warriors stop mid-sentence and listen. I wasn't discussing plans for victory. I was explaining how we would execute what was already determined. My officers felt it immediately. The uncertainty that had plagued our preparations evaporated, replaced by an energy that transformed our entire army. You see, there's a profound difference between confidence and certainty. Confidence says, I believe I can win. Certainty says, victory is already mine. We're simply moving through the necessary steps to claim it. Confidence wavers under pressure. Certainty remains unshakable because it operates from a completed outcome, not a hoped-for one. Most people sabotage themselves through doubt before any external opponent can defeat them. They enter negotiations thinking, I hope this works out. They present ideas thinking maybe they'll accept this. They pursue opportunities thinking, if I'm lucky, this could happen. This mindset broadcasts weakness to everyone around them. When I commanded troops, they could sense my unwavering belief in our inevitable success. It wasn't arrogance, it was the calm assurance of someone who had already seen the end of the story. Soldiers who might have fled under uncertain leadership instead stood firm, because my certainty became their certainty. Fear cannot coexist with absolute conviction. I remember one particular siege where we were vastly outnumbered and surrounded. My lieutenants approached me with worry etched on their faces, speaking of escape routes and retreat strategies. I listened patiently, then responded with complete calm. We will not be retreating because we have already won. The enemy simply doesn't know it yet. The psychological transformation in that tent was immediate. Men who had been calculating odds suddenly began calculating victory. This is the mind of a conqueror, not someone who fights to win, but someone who fights from victory. The battle becomes a formality, a physical manifestation of what has already been determined through superior positioning, preparation, and absolute mental conviction. When you operate from this level of certainty, others have no choice but to respond to your reality rather than imposing their doubts upon you. My philosophy has always been that battles are won through preparation, not during combat. Victory is never achieved in the heat of conflict, is secured long before the first sword is drawn. This understanding came from studying the stone tablets of preparation, ancient carved stones that outlined my systematic approach to ensuring triumph before any engagement. When I was a young strategist, I made the mistake most people make. I focused on what I would do during the battle, studied tactics, formations, and weapons. But I was thinking like someone who hoped to win rather than someone who had already won. The transformation came when I realized that uncertainty exists only in the absence of proper preparation. I developed what I called the 3 pillars of acting from victory: knowledge, positioning, and mindset. Knowledge means understanding every variable that could influence the outcome. Positioning means arranging circumstances so that success becomes inevitable. Mindset means operating from the completed outcome rather than working toward a hoped-for result. My intelligence networks became legendary throughout ancient China, but they weren't built for gathering secrets. They were built for eliminating unknowns. I needed to understand my opponent's capabilities, their psychology, their resources, and their limitations. More importantly, I needed to understand the terrain, the weather, the political climate, and every factor that could influence our engagement. When you have complete knowledge, uncertainty becomes impossible. I spent months before each campaign mapping not just the physical battlefield, but the political landscape, the economic pressures, and the personal motivations of every key player. While my opponents were sharpening their swords, I was eliminating variables that could lead to defeat. By the time we faced each other, I had already removed most paths to their victory. This systematic approach to preparation became the foundation of my success. I learned that acting from victory requires doing the work others won't do. Most generals prepared for battle. I prepared for inevitable triumph. The difference is, profound. One approach hopes for the best outcome. The other ensures it. In your modern workplace, this principle applies with equal power. When you prepare thoroughly enough, success stops being a question mark and becomes a period at the end of a completed sentence. Most people prepare just enough to compete. Those who act from victory prepare so thoroughly that competition becomes irrelevant. I remember preparing for one particular campaign where I spent 6 months studying a single opponent. I learned his sleeping patterns, his decision-making tendencies under stress, his relationships with subordinates, and even his personal fears. By the time we met in battle, I knew him better than he knew himself. The engagement lasted less than 2 hours, not because my army was superior, but because my preparation had made his defeat mathematical. The modern application is equally powerful. When you understand your workplace terrain completely, the politics, the personalities, the unspoken rules, the real decision makers, you can position yourself for success with such precision that others perceive it as natural talent or remarkable luck. They don't see the months of systematic preparation that made your triumph inevitable. This is the foundation. Victory is not something you achieve. It's something you engineer through preparation so thorough that failure becomes impossible. There was a campaign early in my career where my army was trapped in a valley with enemy forces controlling all apparent escape routes. My officers saw only death or surrender. I saw the greatest strategic opportunity of my military life. This moment taught me the art of reading terrain that others cannot perceive. The jade compass of direction, my mystical navigation tool, represented more than physical direction. It symbolized the ability to see advantages invisible to conventional thinking. While my enemies positioned themselves on high ground, believing they held the advantage, I recognized that their positioning had created the exact conditions for their own defeat. That night, I studied the valley not as a trap, but as a strategic gift. The enemy's superior positioning meant they felt secure, which meant they would be less vigilant. Their elevated position gave them visibility, but also made them visible. Most importantly, Their confidence in their advantage had made them predictable. When dawn broke, we used their own positioning against them in a maneuver that military strategists still study today. This experience taught me that opportunity often wears the disguise of obstacle. Most people see only the immediate, obvious terrain. Those who act from victory learn to read the deeper patterns, the hidden advantages that present themselves only to those who know how to look. In your modern workplace, the terrain is equally rich with hidden opportunities. The politics that frustrate most people become navigation tools for those who understand them. The difficult personalities that others avoid become strategic allies for those who read their deeper motivations. The projects that others consider dead ends become launching pads for those who see their true potential. I developed specific techniques for reading environmental advantages. First, I would identify what everyone else was seeing, the obvious terrain that shapes conventional thinking. Then I would look for what they were missing, the subtle advantages that only become visible when you shift your perspective from hoping for the best to engineering the inevitable. The art of timing became crucial to my success. I learned to recognize when conditions favored bold action versus strategic patience. Most people act when they feel ready. Those who operate from victory act when conditions are optimal, regardless of personal comfort. This distinction created most of my greatest triumphs. There was a siege where I waited for 3 months while my advisors urged immediate action. They saw delay as weakness. I saw preparation for inevitable victory. When the moment finally arrived, when weather, politics, and enemy morale aligned perfectly, we achieved in 3 days what desperate action could not have accomplished in 3 years. The same principle governs modern career advancement. Most people make moves when they feel ready or when pressure forces their hand. Those who read terrain correctly wait for the convergence of optimal conditions. When their preparation meets perfect opportunity, this patience isn't passive waiting. It's active positioning for inevitable success. Your workplace terrain includes relationships, projects, market conditions, organizational changes, and personal reputations. Each element creates currents of opportunity for those who learn to read them. The promotion that seems impossible to most becomes inevitable for someone who positions themselves at the intersection of organizational need and personal capability. I learned to recognize when the terrain had shifted in my favor, when my preparation had created conditions where victory was no longer a possibility but a mathematical certainty. The signs were always subtle: changes in how others responded to my presence, shifts in political dynamics, moments when resistance began to evaporate without direct confrontation. Developing this awareness requires shifting from reactive thinking to strategic perception. Instead of responding to what happens to you, you learn to read the patterns that determine what will happen next. This elevated perspective transforms you from someone hoping for good fortune into someone who creates the conditions that make fortune inevitable. The greatest victories of my military career were won not through superior force, but through superior understanding of human psychology. I spent years studying the obsidian mask of perception during my meditation practices, learning to see past surface behaviors into the deeper motivations that drive human action. What I discovered changed everything about how I approached conflict. Most generals studied their opponent's military capabilities. I studied their fears, desires, and psychological patterns. I learned that every person, no matter how powerful or confident they appear, operates from predictable psychological drivers. When you understand these patterns, you can anticipate their moves with mathematical precision through careful observation. I identified 3 fundamental types of opponents, each with distinct psychological weaknesses that could be exploited through strategic positioning. The first type is driven by fear. These opponents make decisions primarily to avoid loss rather than to create gain. They are cautious, defensive, and reactive. Their strength lies in their careful preparation, but their weakness is their inability to act boldly when opportunity presents itself. Against such opponents, I learned to create situations that forced them to choose between certain small losses and potential large gains. Fear-driven people almost always choose the certain small loss, which over time creates the very large loss they were trying to avoid. The second type is driven by ego. These opponents need to be seen as superior, intelligent, and dominant. They make decisions based on how those decisions will be perceived by others. Their strength is their boldness and willingness to take risks, but their weakness is their predictable need for recognition. Against ego-driven opponents, I learned to offer them victories that felt significant but were strategically meaningless, while quietly securing the positions that actually mattered. The third type is driven by greed. These opponents focus primarily on immediate, tangible gains. They are often brilliant tactically but weak strategically because they sacrifice long-term positioning for short-term advantage. Against greed-driven opponents, I learned to offer them immediate gains that created long-term disadvantages, or to structure situations where their greed would lead them into overextension. I remember one campaign where I faced a brilliant general, known throughout the region for his tactical expertise. Through careful study, I recognized that he was driven primarily by ego. He needed to be seen as the greatest military mind of his generation. Instead of engaging him where he was strongest, I created a series of situations where he could demonstrate his tactical brilliance while unknowingly positioning himself for strategic defeat. Allowed him to win several small engagements that enhanced his reputation but weakened his overall position. Each victory fed his ego and reinforced his confidence in his approach. Meanwhile, I was positioning my forces for a single, decisive engagement that would render all his tactical victories meaningless. When that moment came, his own psychology had become his greatest enemy. The psychological principle that governs all human behavior is this: people will reliably choose actions that reinforce their existing identity and worldview, even when those actions work against their stated objectives. Fear-driven people will choose safety over opportunity. Ego-driven people will choose recognition over advantage. Greed-driven people will choose immediate gain over long-term benefit. In your modern workplace, these same psychological patterns govern every interaction. The colleague who always needs credit is ego-driven. Offer them visible recognition for less important contributions while you secure the positions that actually advance your career. The boss who avoids risk is fear-driven. Present your boldest ideas as ways to prevent problems rather than create opportunities. The competitor who focuses on immediate results is greed-driven. Let them chase short-term wins while you build long-term advantages. The key insight is that most people create their own defeat through their psychological patterns. Your role is not to defeat them, it's to create conditions where their own psychology leads them to defeat themselves. This approach requires patience and deeper strategic thinking, but it creates victories that appear effortless because they flow from your opponent's own choices. When you understand psychology at this level, conflict becomes less about force and more about positioning. You stop trying to overpower others and start creating situations where their own psychological drivers work in your favor. This is how you achieve victory that feels inevitable, because it flows from patterns that are deeper and more reliable than any specific tactic or strategy. The moment I truly understood power was when I realized that acting like a general made me one. I was sitting in what I called my golden throne of command, not an actual throne, but a mental position of unquestionable authority that I claimed before anyone else recognized it. This shift in identity preceded every external validation of my leadership by months or even years. Most people wait for permission to step into their power. They believe that authority must be granted by others before it can be exercised. This thinking keeps them perpetually waiting for someone else to validate what they should have claimed for themselves. I learned that positioning yourself as the victor changes how others perceive and treat you, often before you've achieved any external evidence of success. When I began operating from the mindset of established authority rather than aspiring hope, my troops' behavior toward me changed immediately. They started seeking my opinion on matters beyond my official responsibility. They deferred to my judgment even when other officers outranked me. They began treating me like the leader I had decided to become, long before the formal recognition arrived. This transformation happened because humans are unconsciously programmed to respond to certain energy patterns. When someone truly embodies authority, not arrogance, but calm, certain leadership others naturally organize themselves around that energy. Most people are looking for someone to follow, someone who projects the confidence and clarity they lack. When you authentically claim that position, you're giving them what they're already seeking. I remember a crucial moment early in my career when I was among several candidates being considered for a major command position. The other candidates spent their time highlighting their qualifications and hoping to impress the selection committee. I took a different approach, began operating as if the position was already mine. I started speaking about our future campaigns rather than my qualifications. I referred to the troops as my army rather than the army I hoped to lead. I discussed strategy with the confidence of someone who already had the authority to implement it. Most importantly, I treated the other candidates not as competitors, but as potential subordinates whose talents I would need to utilize effectively. The psychological impact was profound. Within days, the other candidates began unconsciously treating me as the inevitable choice. The selection committee stopped evaluating me and started seeking my input on their decision. I had claimed the position before it was offered, and everyone else simply aligned with that reality. This principle applies powerfully in modern workplace dynamics. Instead of working toward promotion, you begin operating from the identity of someone who has already been promoted. You start taking responsibility at the level you want to reach, rather than the level you currently occupy. You speak and act with the authority you want to possess, not the authority your current title provides. The difference is subtle but profound. Most people demonstrate their worthiness for advancement by excelling at their current role. Those who understand strategic positioning demonstrate their readiness for advancement by already embodying the identity of the expanded role. They don't wait for the title, they grow into the identity that makes the title inevitable. The key is authenticity. This isn't about pretending to have authority you don't possess. It's about claiming the authority that your preparation and capability have already earned. When your positioning is backed by genuine competence and strategic preparation, others recognize the legitimacy of your claim even before it's officially validated. You communicate from a position of established authority rather than hoped for recognition. You make statements instead of suggestions. You provide direction instead of seeking approval. You solve problems at the level you want to operate, not just the level where you're currently positioned. This shift in identity creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you authentically embody the position you're moving toward, you create the conditions that make achieving that position inevitable. Others begin to see you as the natural choice for advancement because you've already demonstrated that you belong in that expanded role. There was a moment in my military career when everything hung in balance, and the decision I made in the next 30 seconds would determine the fate of my entire army. My iron sword of resolution, the personal weapon that symbolized swift action, without hesitation, had taught me that decisive moments required decisive leaders. What I learned in that crucible changed how I approach every significant decision. My scouts had reported enemy movement that contradicted all our intelligence. My advisors were splitsome, urged immediate retreat. Others demanded we hold position for more information. Every second of delay weakened our strategic advantage. In that moment, I realized that seeking perfect certainty is the enemy of effective action. I drew my sword and pointed toward the enemy position. "We advance immediately," I declared, not because I had perfect information, but because I had sufficient information combined with absolute conviction in our ability to handle whatever we encountered. That decision led to one of my most celebrated victories, not because it was obviously correct, but because it was executed with complete commitment. Most people paralyze themselves seeking certainty that will never come. They want to know the outcome before they take action, which means they never take meaningful action at all. They confuse careful consideration with endless deliberation. They mistake hesitation for wisdom. This approach guarantees mediocrity because every significant opportunity requires acting before the outcome is certain. I trained myself to act decisively with incomplete information by developing what I call my decision framework. First, I would gather sufficient information, not perfect information, but enough to make an educated choice. Second, I would consider the cost of delay versus the cost of imperfect action. Third, I would choose the path that aligned with my strategic objectives, regardless of short-term comfort. The compound effect of decisive actions built my reputation faster than any military victory. Soldiers want to follow leaders who make clear decisions under pressure. Allies want to work with people who can commit to a course of action and execute it fully. Opponents respect adversaries who act with conviction rather than hope. In your modern workplace, the same principles apply with equal force. The colleague who makes decisions quickly and adjusts course when necessary advances faster than the one who deliberates endlessly seeking perfect information. The leader who commits fully to strategies and executes them with conviction earns more trust than the one who hedges every decision with uncertainty. I developed specific techniques for maintaining decisiveness under pressure. When facing difficult choices, I would remind myself that no decision is permanent if approached with intelligence and flexibility. The key is to make the best decision available with current information, then execute it with complete commitment while remaining alert to new information that might require adjustment. Hesitation signals defeat to both allies and opponents. When you delay action seeking perfect certainty, you communicate doubt in your own judgment. Others interpret this delay as weakness, which undermines your position regardless of what decision you eventually make. Speed of decision, combined with strength of execution, creates momentum that often matters more than the precision of the choice itself. The most successful people I've observed share this characteristic. They make decisions rapidly and execute them completely. They understand that a good decision implemented immediately usually produces better results than a perfect decision implemented too late. They choose action over analysis when the situation demands forward movement. This is the art of decisive action, not reckless impulse, but educated conviction translated into immediate, committed action that creates momentum others must respond to rather than wait for. The development of unshakable inner conviction was perhaps the most difficult and most crucial aspect of my transformation from hopeful general to inevitable victor. I spent countless hours with my crystal meditation stone, a sacred crystal that became the foundation of my daily practices for developing unbreakable inner certainty. What I discovered through these practices changed not just my military success, but my entire understanding of human potential. Early in my career, I was plagued by the same doubts that destroy most people's effectiveness. I would lie awake before battles wondering if my strategies were sound, if my troops would follow my commands, if I had the capability to achieve the outcomes I claimed to seek. This internal uncertainty was more dangerous than any enemy army because it weakened my decision-making and undermined my presence with others. The transformation began when I realized that doubt is not a reflection of reality, it's a reflection of insufficient mental training. Just as physical strength requires systematic development, inner conviction requires deliberate cultivation through specific practices and mental disciplines. I developed a series of daily rituals designed to reinforce my identity as a victorious leader. Each morning, I would spend 1 hour in meditation, not seeking peace or relaxation, but building absolute certainty about my capabilities and my inevitable success. I would visualize not just winning battles, but commanding with such authority that victory felt natural and expected. The internal dialogue shift was crucial. I trained myself to move from "I hope I can" to "I know I will." This wasn't positive thinking or affirmations, it was a fundamental rewiring of my mental operating system. Instead of hoping for good outcomes, I operated from the assumption that good outcomes were inevitable consequences of my preparation and execution. During one particularly challenging campaign, I faced my greatest test of inner conviction. We had suffered several setbacks. My advisors were questioning my strategy, and doubt was spreading through the ranks like a plague. The external evidence suggested that my confidence was misplaced. This was the moment when unshakable conviction proved its worth. Instead of allowing external circumstances to determine my internal state, I returned to my fundamental practices. I spent additional time with my meditation stone, reinforcing my absolute belief in our eventual victory. I reminded myself that temporary setbacks are not evidence of ultimate failure. They are simply obstacles that separate those who maintain conviction from those who abandon it under pressure. The breakthrough came when I stopped seeking external validation for my conviction. Most people's confidence depends on favorable circumstances, supportive feedback, and visible progress toward their goals. This approach makes confidence fragile because external conditions constantly change. True conviction must be independent of circumstances, because circumstances fluctuate by their very nature. I learned to draw my certainty from deeper sources: my preparation, my capabilities, my understanding of strategic principles, and my commitment to continuous improvement. These elements remained constant regardless of temporary setbacks or external pressure. This inner foundation became unshakable because it was based on factors I controlled completely. The daily rituals I practiced became the cornerstone of my success. Each morning, I would reinforce my identity as someone for whom victory was inevitable. Each evening, I would review the day's events through the lens of long-term strategic progress rather than short-term outcomes. This practice trained my mind to see setbacks as temporary delays rather than permanent defeats. In your modern context, these same principles apply with equal power. The executive who maintains conviction during market downturns positions themselves for massive gains during recovery. The entrepreneur who holds certainty during difficult periods attracts the resources and opportunities that create breakthrough success. The employee who embodies confidence during organizational uncertainty becomes the natural choice for advancement when stability returns. The key insight is that external validation weakens your ability to act from victory. When your conviction depends on others' approval or favorable circumstances, you become reactive rather than proactive. You wait for permission instead of creating opportunity. You hope for the best instead of engineering inevitability. Building unshakable inner conviction requires treating your mental state as seriously as any other professional skill. It demands daily practice, systematic development, and unwavering commitment to maintaining your chosen identity, regardless of external pressures. This foundation becomes the source of all external success, because it enables you to act from certainty when others are paralyzed by doubt. My personal energy and presence communicated victory before I ever spoke a word. The silk banner of presence, My royal banner that commanded attention and respect represented something deeper than symbolic authority, embodied the energy of certain victory that others could feel immediately upon entering my presence. I discovered that humans respond to energy patterns below the level of conscious awareness. When someone truly embodies certainty and authority, others feel it in their bodies before their minds process it. This energetic communication is more powerful than words because it operates at a primal level where doubt and rationalization cannot interfere. The transformation in my presence began when I stopped trying to convince others of my capabilities and started embodying the reality of my inevitable success. Instead of hoping people would respect me, I projected the energy of someone who had already earned that respect through demonstrated results. The shift was subtle, but profound. People began treating me differently before I had achieved any external validation of this new identity. I learned to recognize the body, language, and vocal patterns of someone who had already won. The victor stands differently, not with arrogance, but with calm stability that suggests unshakable foundation. The victor speaks differently, not with loud demands for attention, but with quiet confidence that naturally draws others in. The victor moves differently, not with nervous energy, but with purposeful direction that others instinctively want to follow. There was a negotiation early in my career where this understanding saved my entire military campaign. I was meeting with a potential ally whose support was crucial to our success, but his initial response was dismissive and uninterested. Instead of trying harder to convince him through arguments, I shifted my entire presence to embody the energy of someone whose victory was already assured. I sat differently with the relaxed confidence of someone who didn't need this particular alliance because success was coming regardless. I spoke differently, not with desperate persuasion, but with the calm certainty of someone sharing inevitable outcomes. I listened differently, not with anxious hope for approval, but with the generous attention of someone who had time and patience because the ultimate result was not in question. The change in his response was immediate and dramatic. Within minutes, he was leaning forward, asking detailed questions about how he could participate in our success. He had unconsciously shifted from evaluating whether to help me to figuring out how to position himself advantageously in my inevitable victory. In your modern workplace, this principle manifests in every meeting, presentation, and crucial conversation. The person who enters negotiations projecting the energy of inevitable success creates entirely different dynamics than the person who hopes for favorable outcomes. Others respond to your energetic reality, even when they can't articulate what they're sensing. The key is authenticity. This presence must flow from genuine inner conviction, not superficial posturing. When your external presence aligns with unshakable inner certainty, you create a magnetic quality that draws opportunity and support toward you. People want to align themselves with winners, and they can sense true winner energy, even before external results validate it. This controlled presence becomes one of your most powerful strategic tools, because it shapes every interaction in your favor before conscious negotiation even begins. The language patterns of victory are entirely different from the language patterns of hope. My ivory horn of command, the ancient communication device that represented the power of words spoken with absolute authority, taught me that how you speak determines how others respond far more than what you actually say. I learned to speak as someone who had already achieved the outcome rather than someone working toward it. This shift in communication style created profound changes in how others perceived both me and my proposals. Instead of seeking approval for my ideas, I began sharing the inevitable outcomes that my strategies would produce. The psychological impact was transformative. Most people undermine themselves through tentative, hopeful language that broadcasts uncertainty. They say, "I think we should consider," instead of "we will implement." They ask, "Would it be possible to," instead of declaring, "This is how we'll proceed." They hedge their statements with qualifiers that give others permission to doubt their judgment. The language of someone operating from victory is fundamentally different. It assumes success rather than requesting it. It states outcomes rather than proposing possibilities. It invites participation in inevitable results rather than seeking permission for uncertain attempts. This communication style creates a completely different response in listeners. I remember a crucial alliance negotiation where my communication approach determined the entire outcome. The potential ally began the meeting by explaining why cooperation would be difficult and risky. Instead of addressing his concerns with reassurances, I responded by describing the benefits he would gain from our joint victory and the timeline for achieving those results. Notice the difference. I didn't argue against his concerns, spoke from a reality where those concerns were irrelevant because success was already determined. I didn't try to convince him that cooperation was possibly described how he would benefit from the victory we would inevitably achieve together. This approach shifted the entire conversation from whether to cooperate to how to maximize his gains from our collaboration. The subtle art of making statements that others accept as inevitable truth requires understanding how human psychology responds to certainty. When someone speaks with genuine conviction about outcomes, listeners unconsciously begin to organize their thinking around those outcomes rather than questioning their possibility. The certainty itself becomes compelling evidence in your modern context. This principle transforms every important conversation. Instead of asking your boss if you might be considered for promotion, you discuss the additional value you'll create in your expanded role. Instead of hoping clients will accept your proposal, you explain how your solution will solve their problem and when they can expect results. The key is presenting ideas as foregone conclusions rather than tentative suggestions. You speak about future outcomes with the same certainty others use to describe past events. You discuss implementation details rather than possibility questions. You assume cooperation rather than anticipating resistance. This communication style must be backed by genuine preparation and capability. You cannot speak from victory unless you've done the work to make victory inevitable. The language patterns become powerful precisely because they reflect authentic inner conviction and thorough strategic planning. When you master strategic communication from victory, you stop trying to convince others and start creating space for them to participate in your inevitable success. The conversation shifts from whether your ideas will work to how everyone can benefit from their implementation. This is the communication style of leaders who create reality rather than responding to it. My greatest military defeat became the foundation of my ultimate success, teaching me the most valuable lesson of my entire career. The twisted root staff, my walking staff carved from a gnarled root, symbolized how obstacles become sources of strength when approached with the proper mindset. What appeared to be my complete destruction was actually my transformation into an unstoppable strategic force. K had suffered a crushing defeat that destroyed much of my army and shattered my reputation throughout the region. My advisors abandoned me, my allies distanced themselves, and my enemies celebrated what they believed was my permanent downfall. By conventional measures, my career as a military leader was over. This moment forced me to discover something profound about the nature of victory and defeat. Instead of viewing this setback as evidence of my inadequacy, I began to study it as strategic information. I analyzed every decision that had led to the defeat, not with self-blame, but with the objective curiosity of someone studying an opponent's victory. What I discovered was invaluable intelligence about my own weaknesses and the specific strategic errors that had created vulnerability. This systematic analysis revealed patterns I had never recognized before. I saw how my previous successes had made me overconfident and predictable. I understood how my reputation had actually worked against me by making enemies unite in ways they never would have against a lesser threat. Most importantly, I realized that this defeat had eliminated every weakness in my strategic approach while teaching me lessons that victory never could. The reframing process became a cornerstone of my philosophy. Instead of asking why did this happen to me, I asked how does this position me for greater success. Instead of seeing the defeat as random bad fortune, I viewed it as expensive but invaluable education that my enemies had unknowingly provided. This mindset shift transformed devastation into advantage. When I emerged from this period of reflection and rebuilding, I was no longer the same strategist who had suffered defeat. I had become someone whose approach to warfare was so comprehensive and adaptable that conventional opposition became ineffective. My enemies had unknowingly created their most formidable opponent by teaching me lessons I could have learned no other way. The psychological advantage of welcoming challenges while others fear them cannot be overstated. When you genuinely view obstacles as opportunities for growth and strategic positioning, you approach difficulties with curiosity rather than anxiety. This completely changes your creative capacity and problem-solving ability under pressure. Learned to use opponents' strengths against them through strategic repositioning. Their advantages became tools for my victory when I understood how to position myself correctly in relation to their capabilities. The enemy's superior numbers became a logistics burden when we controlled supply lines. Their aggressive tactics became predictable patterns when we understood their psychological drivers. In your modern workplace, this same principle transforms career setbacks into competitive advantages. The project failure that devastates others becomes invaluable learning that positions you for greater responsibility. The difficult boss who frustrates colleagues becomes a masterclass in managing challenging personalities. The economic downturn that paralyzes competitors becomes an opportunity to gain market position while others retreat. The key insight is that obstacles contain information and opportunities that are invisible during smooth periods. Challenges force innovation, reveal character, and create capabilities that easy circumstances never develop. Most people avoid difficulties, which means mastering them gives you advantages others will never possess. When you learn to extract maximum value from every setback, failure becomes impossible because every outcome contributes to your ultimate success. You stop dividing experiences into good and bad, instead evaluating everything based on its contribution to your strategic development. This perspective makes you antifragile, become stronger from stress rather than weaker. This is the mindset that transforms obstacles into advantages, viewing every challenge as strategic information that improves your position for future success. Small acts of certainty created massive changes in my military campaigns through what I came to understand as the compound effect of victory mindset. The interlocking rings of power, my ancient symbol representing how small victories build into unstoppable momentum, showed me that consistent application of victory principles creates exponential rather than linear results. The transformation began with seemingly insignificant changes in how I approached daily decisions. Instead of hoping my morning briefings would go well, I entered them with the assumption that they would produce exactly the outcomes I intended. Instead of wondering whether my orders would be followed effectively, I gave commands with the complete expectation that they would be executed perfectly. These small shifts in approach created ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate interactions. When I operated from certainty in small matters, it reinforced my capacity for certainty in larger ones. When subordinates experienced my unwavering confidence in routine decisions, they began to trust my judgment in critical moments. The compound effect built momentum that became visible to everyone around me. I observed this pattern most clearly during one extended campaign, where I tracked the exponential growth that occurred when victory mindset was applied consistently. Early positioning decisions that seemed minor at the time created advantages that multiplied over weeks and months. A single act of confident leadership during a routine supply discussion led to improved logistics that affected every subsequent battle. The exponential nature of this growth pattern surprised even me. I had expected linear improvement, better decisions, leading to better outcomes in direct proportion. What actually happened was that each application of victory mindset made the next application more effective and more natural. Success built upon success in ways that created momentum beyond what any individual decision could explain. My reputation for victory became a strategic asset that worked independently of my actual presence. Enemies began making defensive decisions based solely on the possibility that I might be involved in a campaign. Allies sought my participation not just for my tactical abilities, but for the psychological advantage my presence brought to any endeavor. The compound effect had created value that extended beyond my personal capabilities. In your modern context, this same exponential pattern applies to career development and professional reputation. When you consistently apply victory mindset to small workplace interactions, it builds credibility that transforms how others perceive your potential for larger responsibilities. Each successful project strengthens your identity as someone who delivers results, which leads to better opportunities, which reinforces your reputation for success. The momentum that builds when others begin to expect your success creates self-fulfilling prophecies that accelerate your advancement. Colleagues start bringing you their best ideas. Superiors begin thinking of you first for important assignments. Clients request your involvement in their most crucial projects. This happens because your consistent demonstration of victory mindset has created expectations that work in your favor. The key insight is that compound effects require consistency over time. Occasional acts of confidence produce limited results. Daily application of victory principles creates unstoppable momentum that eventually appears effortless to outside observers. They see the final results but miss the accumulated decisions that made those results inevitable. When you understand this compound effect, you realize that every interaction is either building or diminishing your momentum toward inevitable success. This awareness transforms how you approach routine decisions, because you recognize their contribution to your larger strategic objectives. My certainty became contagious and elevated my entire army's performance in ways that transformed ordinary soldiers into an unstoppable force. The United Shields formation, representing how certain leadership inspires others to share in victory, showed me that when you truly operate from inevitable success, you create a field of possibility that others naturally want to enter, and maintain the leadership principles that emerge when you operate from inevitable success are fundamentally different from conventional management approaches. Instead of motivating people toward uncertain outcomes, you invite them to participate in results that are already determined. Instead of pushing others to achieve goals, you create space for them to contribute to a victory that feels mathematically certain. I remember the moment this transformation became visible. We were facing an impossible siege against a fortress that had never been conquered. My officers were presenting various strategies, each acknowledging the significant probability of failure. I listened to their analysis, then responded from my position of absolute certainty. Gentlemen, we're not here to attempt to take this fortress. We're here to determine the most efficient method for claiming what is already ours. The energetic shift in that command tent was immediate and profound. These veteran soldiers had been psychologically preparing for a difficult fight with uncertain outcomes. Suddenly, they were participating in a strategic planning session for an inevitable victory. Their entire approach to the challenge changed from hoping for success to engineering the most elegant path to predetermined triumph. This is the magnetic quality that draws talent and resources to certain leaders. When people sense that you're operating from genuine conviction about outcomes rather than hope about possibilities, they want to align themselves with that energy. They shift from evaluating whether to follow you to figuring out how to position themselves advantageously in your success. The responsibility that comes with others, depending on your unwavering certainty, is profound and cannot be taken lightly. When soldiers will follow your judgment into life or death situations, your conviction must be based on thorough preparation and genuine capability, not wishful thinking or empty bravado. Their trust demands that your certainty be earned through competence, not manufactured through positive thinking. I learned to build teams that expected success because I embodied it consistently. Each member understood that their role was not to hope for good outcomes, but to execute their part of a comprehensive strategy that had already accounted for every variable. This created a collective confidence that made our army more effective than the sum of its individual capabilities. In your modern workplace, these same principles transform how others respond to your leadership. When you operate from genuine certainty about project outcomes, team members shift from wondering whether success is possible to focusing on how to maximize their contribution to inevitable results. This changes everything about team dynamics and performance. The key is learning to project confidence in outcomes while maintaining humility about methods. You communicate absolute certainty that objectives will be achieved while remaining open to input about the best approaches for achieving them. This combination creates psychological safety for others to contribute their best thinking while maintaining the energetic field of inevitable success. Team members working under this type of leadership report higher satisfaction, better performance, and stronger commitment to objectives. They're not spending mental energy worrying about whether the mission will succeed. They're investing all their creativity in ensuring it succeeds excellently. This focus creates results that validate the leader's original certainty. Building this type of leadership presence requires moving beyond traditional motivational approaches. Instead of trying to convince others that success is possible, you create conditions where success feels inevitable. Instead of inspiring hope, you generate participation in certainty. Instead of pushing others toward goals, you invite them into a reality where those goals are already achieved. The modern applications extend to every type of leadership situation. Project managers who operate from this principle create teams that deliver ahead of schedule and above expectations. Entrepreneurs who embody this certainty attract investors and customers more easily. Executives who project inevitable success inspire organizational confidence that becomes self-fulfilling. When you master leading others from certain victory, you discover that leadership becomes less about convincing and more about creating space for others to contribute their talents to predetermined success. This approach transforms followers into collaborators and creates collective momentum that makes individual limitations irrelevant. Maintaining certainty during prolonged sieges and hardships taught me that true victory mindset must be independent of external circumstances. The eternal flame vessel, my sacred container holding fire that never extinguished, represented the unbreakable inner victory that sustains you when external evidence suggests otherwise. This became my most crucial capability as a strategist. During one particularly brutal campaign, we faced months of difficult conditions that tested every principle I had developed about operating from certainty. Supply lines were disrupted, morale was declining, and several of my most trusted advisors began questioning our strategy. The external environment provided no support for maintaining confidence in our ultimate success. This was when I learned the difference between conditional confidence and unconditional certainty. Conditional confidence depends on favorable circumstances, positive feedback, and visible progress toward objectives. This type of confidence collapses under pressure because it requires external validation to maintain itself. Unconditional certainty draws strength from deeper sources that remain constant regardless of temporary conditions. I developed mental techniques for maintaining victory mindset when external evidence suggested otherwise. The key insight was learning to distinguish between temporary obstacles and permanent defeats. Most setbacks are temporary delays that only become permanent when you abandon your certainty in response to them. The mental discipline required is treating temporary conditions as temporary regardless of their intensity or duration. My framework for sustaining certainty during adversity became systematic and practical. First, I would remind myself that current conditions are information, not verdicts. Difficult circumstances provide data about what adjustments might be needed, but they don't invalidate the fundamental strategy or objective. Second, I would reconnect with the preparation and capability that had originally justified my certainty. These foundations remained solid. Even when external conditions were challenging, the spiritual practices that sustained me through the darkest military campaigns became as important as any tactical skill. Each morning, regardless of circumstances, I would spend time reinforcing my identity as someone for whom victory was inevitable. Each evening, I would review the day's events from the perspective of long-term strategic progress rather than short-term comfort or discomfort. Most people abandon their certainty at the first sign of difficulty because they misunderstand the relationship between confidence and circumstances. They believe that maintaining certainty during adversity is unrealistic or delusional. What they miss is that certainty during adversity is precisely when it becomes most valuable and most necessary in your modern context. This principle applies to every challenging period in career or business development. Market downturns, organizational changes, project setbacks, and personal obstacles all test your commitment to operating from victory. Those who maintain their certainty during these periods position themselves to benefit dramatically when conditions improve. The mental techniques for sustaining victory mindset during adversity include focusing on factors you control rather than factors you don't, maintaining daily practices that reinforce your chosen identity, and treating setbacks as temporary delays rather than permanent defeats. This requires genuine mental discipline because external pressures naturally push you toward reactive thinking. When you develop the capability to maintain certainty regardless of circumstances, you become antifragile rather than merely resilient. Instead of just surviving difficult periods, you use them to strengthen your strategic position and build capabilities that will serve you when conditions improve. This transforms adversity from something that threatens your success into something that accelerates it. The ultimate test of victory mindset is whether it remains intact when everything else appears to be falling apart. Those who pass this test discover that their certainty becomes unshakable because it has been proven under the most challenging possible conditions. Learning to recognize the exact moment when victory became inevitable was perhaps the most sophisticated skill I developed as a strategist. The prophetic scroll of timing, containing my methods for recognizing when victory is mathematically certain, taught me that most battles are decided long before anyone realizes the outcome is no longer in question. There were signs and indicators that confirmed when my strategic positioning had succeeded completely. The enemy's response patterns would shift from aggressive to defensive. Their decision-making would become reactive rather than proactive. Most tellingly, they would begin making moves that served my strategy better than their own. These signals indicated that psychological victory had been achieved even before physical victory became visible. I remember one campaign where I recognized our inevitable success 3 weeks before the final engagement. My opponent had begun making defensive moves that revealed he was no longer fighting to win, but fighting to avoid losing. This shift in psychology meant that victory was already assured. We simply needed to allow our superior positioning to manifest its natural consequences. The art of recognizing this moment requires understanding the difference between hope and mathematical certainty. Hope says things are going well and might continue. Certainty says the strategic positioning has reached a point where defeat is no longer possible. This distinction prevents both premature celebration and unnecessary continued struggle. Most people continue struggling long after success has been assured, because they don't recognize when their strategic work has reached the tipping point. They keep pushing when they should be gracefully transitioning into receiving the results their preparation has earned. This often creates unnecessary complications and can actually delay the manifestation of inevitable success. The psychological shift from working toward victory to accepting what you've earned requires its own form of mental discipline. After operating from certainty for extended periods, there's a natural tendency to keep pushing even when the outcome is no longer in question. Learning to recognize and trust the completion of your strategic work is as important as executing that work initially in your modern workplace. This principle applies to recognizing when promotions have become inevitable, when projects have reached successful completion, or when business development efforts have secured future results. The signs include shifts in how others respond to your presence, changes in the type of opportunities that come to you, and modifications in your organization's expectations about your capabilities. Knowing when to make your move in career advancement requires this same sensitivity to strategic timing. There's a moment when your positioning work has created conditions where advancement is no longer a question, it's simply a matter of the organization catching up to the reality you've created. Acting too early means struggling unnecessarily. Acting too late means missing optimal timing for maximum benefit. The practical skill involves learning to read environmental indicators that confirm your strategic positioning has succeeded. When resistance begins to evaporate, when others start seeking your input on decisions beyond your current authority, when opportunities begin coming to you rather than requiring pursuit, these signals indicate that your foundational work has reached completion. This wisdom transforms how you approach major transitions, because you learn to recognize when the outcome is assured even before external validation appears. The psychological shift from working toward victory to accepting what you've earned is one of the most challenging transitions in human experience. The crown of earned authority, representing the moment of claiming what strategic work has made inevitable, taught me that receiving success gracefully requires its own form of mastery that most people never develop. My transition from general to recognized military strategist illustrates this principle perfectly. For years, I had been developing and applying strategic principles that produced consistent victories. However, I continued operating as someone proving his worth rather than someone who had already demonstrated it. The shift came when I realized that I was working to earn something I had already earned through demonstrated results. This transition required overcoming what I now understand as success resistance, the unconscious tendency to reject or minimize achievements that expand your identity beyond your comfort zone. Most people spend years working toward goals, then sabotage themselves at the moment of achievement because success requires accepting a larger version of themselves than they're comfortable maintaining. I learned to receive success gracefully, instead of with surprise or imposter syndrome, by understanding that achievements are natural consequences of systematic preparation and strategic positioning. When you've done the work thoroughly, success isn't a gift or stroke of luck, it's a predictable outcome that you've earned through competence and consistency. The importance of owning your achievements instead of deflecting credit became clear when I observed how others responded to my acknowledgement of success versus my deflection of it. When I minimized my strategic contributions, others unconsciously did the same. When I clearly acknowledged the connection between my preparation and our victories, others recognized and respected that connection as well. Stepping into expanded identity and responsibility requires conscious identity upgrade. You must deliberately adjust your self-concept to match your demonstrated capabilities rather than your historical limitations. This isn't arrogance, it's accurate self-assessment that allows you to operate effectively at your actual level of competence rather than your outdated comfort zone. The modern applications in accepting promotions, recognition, and increased influence are profound. Many people sabotage career advancement because they're more comfortable with the struggle toward success than with the responsibility of maintaining it. They reject opportunities that match their capabilities because those opportunities require operating from an expanded identity. I developed specific practices for graceful transition into earned success. First, I would consciously acknowledge the connection between my preparation and my results. This reinforced the legitimacy of my achievements and prevented imposter syndrome. Second, I would immediately begin operating at the level of my new position rather than gradually growing into it. Third, I would use increased influence to create value for others, rather than simply enjoying personal benefits. The responsibility that comes with claimed victory extends beyond personal success to creating opportunities for others to succeed as well. When you own your achievements, you become capable of helping others achieve their own victories, rather than remaining focused on proving your worth through continued personal struggle. The key insight is that claiming your rightful victory isn't the end of your development, is the foundation for operating at higher levels of impact and contribution. When you accept success gracefully, you free your energy from proving yourself to creating value. This shift enables you to achieve things that would be impossible while still operating from a mindset of earning rather than contributing. This transition from working toward victory to operating from victory represents the ultimate expression of strategic thinking, applied to personal development and career advancement. My military victories evolved into timeless, strategic principles through a process I never anticipated when I was focused purely on battlefield success. The Eternal Wisdom Codex, representing how victory principles transcend individual achievement to create lasting impact, showed me that true victory extends far beyond personal accomplishment to transformation of others and systems. The responsibility of sharing victory mindset with others who can benefit became clear when I realized that individual success, no matter how complete, remains limited if it doesn't multiply through other people. The principles that had transformed my approach to warfare had applications far beyond military strategy. They could transform how anyone approached challenge, opportunity, and personal development. Personal reflection on how individual certainty can transform entire organizations revealed patterns I had not consciously recognized during my active military career. When one person operates from absolute conviction about outcomes, it creates ripple effects that influence everyone in their sphere of contact. Others begin to expect higher levels of performance from themselves when they're exposed to someone who embodies inevitable success. Why true victory includes elevating others to their own inevitable success became a fundamental part of my philosophy. Victory that benefits only the individual who achieves it is incomplete and ultimately unsatisfying. The most profound form of success is creating conditions where others can develop their own unshakable certainty and achieve their own strategic objectives. My vision for how these principles can create generational change extends beyond immediate workplace applications to cultural transformation. When sufficient numbers of people operate from victory mindset rather than hope and struggle, it changes the energy and possibilities available within entire communities and organizations. This compound effect can shift cultural expectations from limitation to abundance. The compound effect of victory-minded people influencing their spheres creates exponential rather than linear change. Each person who masters these principles becomes a source of possibility for others around them. They demonstrate that certainty and strategic success are learnable capabilities rather than rare talents, which inspires others to develop these same qualities. Modern applications in mentorship, leadership development, and cultural transformation are already becoming visible in organizations where leaders understand and apply these principles. Companies led by people who operate from victory mindset consistently outperform those led by people operating from hope and struggle. The difference shows up in decision-making speed, strategic positioning, and organizational confidence. How to ensure your victory mindset outlasts your individual achievements requires systematically documenting and teaching the principles that created your success. This isn't about ego or recognition. It's about maximizing the impact of what you've learned by making it available to others who can benefit from and build upon your discoveries. The legacy component becomes crucial when you understand that individual success is temporary, but principle-based transformation can be permanent. The specific victories you achieve will be forgotten, but the people whose thinking you've influenced will continue creating victories long after your direct involvement ends. This multiplier effect represents the highest form of strategic thinking. I've observed that people who focus solely on their own success often achieve less than those who focus on creating success for others, while maintaining their own excellence. This apparent paradox makes sense when you understand that helping others succeed creates networks, opportunities, and resources that accelerate your own advancement, while making it more meaningful and sustainable. The responsibility of carrying these principles forward becomes a privilege rather than a burden. When you recognize the transformation they can create in any life or organization where they're properly applied, you stop thinking about personal success and start thinking about systemic improvement that benefits everyone while ensuring your own continued advancement. This evolution from individual victory to collective transformation represents the natural progression of strategic thinking when applied with genuine wisdom and long-term perspective. You now stand at the crossroads between doubt and certainty about your future, and this moment will determine everything that follows. The personal victory seal, representing your commitment to embodying your own inevitable success, waits for you to claim it through decisive action rather than continued contemplation. What I have shared with you represents more than strategic principles, represents a complete transformation in how you perceive yourself and your relationship to success. You can continue operating from hope and struggle, or you can begin operating from the certainty that your victory is already determined through your preparation and strategic positioning. The moment you must choose has arrived. Will you return to second-guessing your decisions and seeking external validation for your capabilities? Or will you step into the identity of someone for whom success is inevitable because you've done the work to make it so? This choice cannot be delayed, because delay itself is a choice that reinforces limitation rather than possibility. Final challenge: to act as if your victory is already decided, beginning tomorrow morning. Operate from the assumption that your major objectives are already achieved and you're simply moving through the necessary steps to claim them. Speak with the certainty of predetermined outcomes. Make decisions with the confidence of someone whose success is mathematically assured. Treat obstacles as strategic information rather than evidence of inadequacy. The transformation that begins the moment you truly accept your inevitable success will surprise you with its speed and completeness. Others will notice the change in your presence before you fully realize what has shifted. Opportunities will begin appearing that were always there, but invisible to someone operating from uncertainty rather than conviction. My blessing for your journey from hope to certainty is this: may you discover that everything you need for victory already exists within your current capabilities and circumstances. May you recognize that success is not something you must earn through struggle, but something you claim through strategic positioning and unshakable conviction. May you understand that your victories will extend far beyond personal achievement to transformation of everyone in your sphere of influence. The legacy you will create by living from victory, instead of working toward, it will inspire others to discover their own inevitable success. This multiplier effect represents the highest purpose of strategic thinking, not just achieving your own objectives, but creating conditions where achievement becomes natural and expected for everyone around you. Your predetermined triumph awaits, your recognition rather than your creation. Step into it with the confidence of someone who has already seen the end of the story and knows that victory was assured before the challenge began. The battlefield may be different, but the principles remain eternal. Your moment of claiming victory starts now.